more on the revolutions, time, and 4D sight. Even though I keep saying there's no revolutionist handbook, I may come up with one. But if I do, it will be in reference to your land. Whoever's reading the book, it'll be your land, and it'll be all about your land. And in every land, you have got the government and you have got the loyal opposition. Some of you might think back and decide that sounds somewhat familiar to the partnership, but some of you keep looking backwards anyway. But in your land, both the government and the loyal opposition, at the very best, can think, can see with 3D consciousness. It would only be in your land. It would only be the revolutionists that could perceive things in a 4D manner. And I want to try and give you an update from last week, another way to consider 4D sight as it's involved with time. Ordinary consciousness, ordinary sight, perceives time as that which separates things. I think there's some old joke somewhere that time, somebody was defining time as being that thing that keeps everything else from running together. That's not simply a joke. The only reason it is a joke, the only reason that somebody said it, the only reason that I read it somewhere and remembered it, is because it is a reflection of something, because ordinary consciousness perceives time without any necessary intellectual analyzation of the matter. But ordinary people perceive time to be that which is a separator. It separates things, it separates events, it separates people. And what revolutionary sight would be, what I was trying to hint to you last week, would be 4D sight, would be antipodal to that, as far as it's possible, which it is verbally. The 4D sight to a revolutionist would be seen as that which unifies, not separates. And if a person were to be able to develop 4D sight, what I'm strongly suggesting to you is that which has always seemed to be inexplicable, that which a man can look at, that which a man can see, then becomes explanatory. But it's only on the basis that you have a continuing perception of time unifying, that in fact from another view it rectifies. It is only by having a continual awareness of time in relationship to everything else, of time never stopping, time not being an invention, time not being the ticking of your watch, time being an absolute dimension, time being that which, were it not holding the other dimensions together, you would not be conscious. And furthermore, of course, pointing out that time is just a word. The word time is not what time really is. But if you had that, then it would be acting as a rectifier, because that which does not make sense, that which does not seem to be logical, that which does not seem to be reasonable, that which does not seem to be just, would become so. But it would only be on the basis that time no longer separates things. Time no longer separates people. Time does not separate, of course, events. It unifies them. You would then have something resembling what I'm calling, or have been calling, 4D sight. It would be the ultimate unifier. It would not be the idea that there is a God somewhere, or that there is a super state of consciousness that man has lost, and that all of this is involved, that this is involved in an attempt to return to the Garden of Eden, to some lost homeland where everything is seen as being unified. Ordinary consciousness cannot unify anything. If we're talking about line level, hardwired consciousness, no matter how intelligent you are, you can never see the unity. People theorize about it. There have been those, as I refer to, as having accidentally awakened circuits and systems within themselves that come back and write the so-called metaphysical tomes, and among other common denominators that all of these attempts have, as you should know, it's some sort of lyrical song that they sing, to wit, that I temporarily realize that everything is connected, that everything is joined together, that the whole world is one big whole. Now that I'm off of that drug, now that I'm off that accident, I'm not sure what all that means. I wrote it down. I tried to burn it into my memory, and I can literally remember the words I'm not sure what it meant now, but it sure was important. It was important. But what would unify everything? What would stop the perception that some things are beneficial and some are not, or for the weaker-minded, for the more childish, the belief that some things are good and some things are bad, that some things are natural and some are unnatural, is because they're separated in time. If you had a continuing awareness that time was the non-stop dimension, then nothing could be seen as, quote, evil, to pick a hard example. It could not be seen as evil, because anything that can be seen as evil, even by you, that is, by anybody under ordinary conditions, anything can be seen as evil can also be seen as good. That's easy to do. Whatever a man says, you ask a man or a woman, define for me or give me an example of evil, whether they be religious or not, and they describe something despicable. Evil would be the taking of another human life. Now, all of you by now surely are hip enough that you can imagine, without me doing it, some way to describe to this person. You say, all right, take this scenario, and you start describing something that gets very personal to him and his family. And it leads him right to the point when you say, what would you do? And the real answer is going to be from that person, well, I would have to kill this other person. It would seem to be, and if he was an ordinary person responding to this, he could say, all right, you're making up what-if examples. And you're making me admit that theoretically this might be true. Well, anything that's theoretically true, as ordinary consciousness would say, is true. You can file the theoretical away with your garbage bags. If it's theoretically true, it's true. If somebody ordinarily says that something is theoretically true, what they're saying is, all right, I almost want to admit it's true, but I don't like it. You've tricked me, I'm forced into it, or I'm not fast enough on my verbal feet to think what the hell to say back to you. And so, all right. I wonder how many times, to pick a real crude example, I guess, the first one that comes to mind is like a William F. Buckley. How many times he sat there with, of course, always picking out his intellectual inferiors, which is not that hard to do. But how many times has he said something to somebody, started trying to push him into a horizontally, logically cul-de-sac, and have them finally say, well, all right, now if you're going to keep taking things theoretical and more theoretical, then what you're saying, it might change my original comment. And all they're saying is I can't think of anything else to say. But that's not really the truth. My side comment right then was, if anything is even theoretically true, it's true. But you should have known that already. If there was a continuing awareness of time, then a person would understand that anything that my ordinary consciousness can look on that seems to me to be a plus, that seems to be an up, you would know it will become theoretical. It can become a minus and a down. If it's red, it can become green. If it seems to be on my right hand, it can be on my left hand. And it will be. And if you had a continuing awareness of time, you would know that already. I wouldn't have to make up examples, no matter what struck your consciousness of, my God, I've never been confronted with this, and this is terrible. We also know this, if you had 4D sight, that seems to be terrible right now, but it's theoretically terrible. It's temporarily terrible. It will not be terrible always. If I tried my best, the most terrible thing that ever happened to me, the most terrible thing that ever happened, if I could try my best, if I willfully tried to hold the feeling of, oh my God, how terrible. If I took that as a task, how long could you hold it? How long can you hold your breath? How long can you go without eating? That's one of the dangers. Take another side step. That's one of the dangers of revenge. If you want to look at it from a horizontal viewpoint, it's so goddamn hard to hold on to the original spark of it. Of how mad I was, but Jesus, by the time you go off and you have a beer, sit down and have a cup of coffee, get down the street, or especially do something really bad, like fuck or take a nap, and you get up, and you're still mad about how dare that person treat me that way, but you can't get as mad as you were. Maybe science will develop some sort of pill to overcome this shortcoming. But if you remember where I was trying to point out a kind of 4D sight would be a continuing awareness that this is the way things are. That things do not exist in 3 dimensions somewhere per se. It is all ad hoc, and it is all completely run through, tied up with, on the background of time. And whatever seems to be a solid something now will be something else. Given enough time, given enough circumstance, what appears to be one thing right now will become its own opposite. It will become its own opposite by my perception. But another way to look at it, once you understand it at all or suspect it, is not only will it become its own opposite from my perspective, it will become its own opposite simply due to the existence of time. The only thing that doesn't change, as I've tried to point out to you, for those of you who really want something to hold on to, the only thing that does not change is buried. Any of you who want to go out and hold on to tombstones, everything else is changing. There is no peace in the land of the living. Now, I know sometimes it seems peaceful. I mean, somebody around here is getting old. Speaking of that, it is easy enough. It is too easy, for some of you especially, some of you who have the propensity, the inclination, the interest, the talent to write, both here and out of town. For you and everybody else, it's very easy for this to become a little too flighty. It becomes a little too theoretically interesting. Some of the maps that I sketch out and some of the ideas seem to titillate, seem to make you giggle, and you can in fact sometimes expound upon it yourself, exposite on it, write your own variations of it, write poetry, cartoons, and I enjoy almost all of them. But you got to remember this. A kiss? No. You've got to remember that if this is anything profitable, then you've got to remember that this has got to be close to every day. It's got to be every day. That doesn't mean that there is no place, let us say, for some of the good nights when I seem to be, and you seem to be, on a roll, and it seems to be things that you never thought about, and it seems to begin to spark areas of your own consciousness you never thought about, and you begin to get little glimpses. It's begun to be like chewing on mints in a dark room. It's like little sparks going off in your head, and yeah, I never thought of that. And yet, you can walk right out of here. We stop the tape and say, that's all for the night, and you walk right out of here. And as far as you're concerned, it's like all the demons, all the difficulties, all the so-called personal problems, all the so-called personal shortcomings and difficulties you have, it's as though, perhaps at best, they waited outside the door and they're out there smoking and hanging around. But as soon as we get through in here, you walk out there and they leap back on your back, they dig themselves into your spine and into your throat. It was like just a nice, interesting interlude is why it is so nice and interesting at times. It was almost like a time out for me being me. If any of you allow that to happen, you do know that I strongly disapprove of that, and that you are not a real revolutionist, and that you're missing the point of it. If it's all it was intellectually interesting, what I'm doing, then we'd be doing it some other way. I'd be out doing it as an entertainer. There'd be a bigger audience for it. All kinds of ifs. But it would not be what it is. It would have never been what it is. It has got to be, I'm not going to stay on this much tonight, except just to tell you, and you got to find your own way, if nothing else, remember these words. This has got to be close to every day. Just everyday shit. If it's not, then you're missing it. You may be being entertained by this, but you're missing it. It's got to be every day. And I was going to get a little closer to every day. We hadn't had a good talking to lately, so this was a small interlude, a lead up to it. And those of you in the band that I've fooled around with before, you remember that I am all in favor of real short intros. Maybe go from a 1 to a minor 2 and a 5. Give it 2 or 4 bars and then end the damn song. Plus, if you're going to write a book and you have the least inclination to write a foreword to that book, slap yourself. Or at least throw away the book and start all over, and this time in mind. I'm going to write a book that doesn't require a goddamn preface to it. So that was our preface. If we had basic tenets, and I don't mean people living in your drawers, or tenets with a one N, a belief, a dogma, and even a catma. One of them would be this, and I wish you would listen, because this is not as simple as it may sound at first. But then if you can hear it a second time, a third time and a fourth time without me seeing it, then it is something. The tenet would be something along these lines, that the real revolutionists cannot simply be themselves. You cannot simply drift along. Now listen, I know most of you think you've heard this or read it somewhere else, but you cannot simply drift along and, quote, be you. You cannot do it. Now right quick, I'll acknowledge when I said some of you, because I'm trying to keep you from falling back into previously accepted beliefs or reading habits. I'm sure that some of you believe that you've read somewhere that there's been would-be occult groups, if not mystical groups and offshoots of religion, that claimed you can't be yourself. You got to be a new person. True. That's good enough. But some of you should be to the point now that I can talk more simplistically or more directly, and you should be able to hear it, that is not simplistic. If you're not doing anything, everybody drifts along and you're just you, whatever it is. Now, you can call it hardwired, you can call it somebody has ingrained genetic personality, you can call it anything you want to, but it seems to be that you're just simply you. You leave here on the way home and you stop in a market, you've got to buy some bread. You got your car, and later I could ask you, what did you do after you left? And you might say, well, I got in the car right after you left, and I drove home. No, I stopped at a 7-Eleven store. You know, it was a Magic Mark, as a matter. Well, it was one of the two. I went out, parked the car, and I got some bread. And let's say within an hour or the rest of the night, you might be able to remember that. But in a sense, you were just drifting along, as you might as well be on your back floating down a river. You didn't get any problems. Nobody started a fight with you. You didn't step on anybody. You didn't have a wreck. You didn't absent-mindedly try to haste to roll a salami while you were in there. You got home all right, but you were just drifting along being you. And we could also admit this. You could have been drifting along being you for 30 years now, 40 years, 50 years, and you made it this far. You have all your limbs. You've never been arrested. You're not under investigation now. At least you haven't been indicted. Looks like you may live another 20 or 30 years. You haven't seemed to have ruined your health. But you were just drifting along being you. Now what I want to tell you is, literally, and I know many of you think that I've given you a task and mentioned this before, but I want you to hear it very directly. You are better off attempting to specifically act like anything than you are to drift along and be you. One time I read of some actress, just some routine, ordinary person in the Western world who's identified as being an actress. And some way they were asking how interesting it was to be an actress and what it meant to her life. And she babbled on for a few minutes, and then she said, well, one thing that I have found that was unexpected about being an actress and doing it for a profession. She said, I learned at an early age I could have things that I had to do business-wise, like parties. There's always parties. Always backers for new plays and movies, and you're always being invited to parties, and a lot of them you got to go to. And being a shy person, I've never liked parties. I just don't like them. And for the first few years of me trying to break into Broadway and movies, break into the actressing biz, this was a problem. And then one time I was going to a party, and it suddenly struck me, is you damn idiot. All you got to do, you got to be here, and you don't like it. All you got to do, you're fixing to walk in this room with the party, all you got to do is just play the part of a woman enjoying a party for an hour. And she said, after that, there's nothing to it. Now, that's an ordinary person. An ordinary person. But by God, I'll bet you Kyroot could say something really inflammatory, if not sarcastic, to you people about an ordinary person knows that, and you people don't. Rather than drifting along and being you, it would be better, I'm telling you, better continually to try and act specifically, though, as something, specifically, not being you, no matter who you are, no matter how educated, no matter how hip, no matter how sophisticated you seem to be. Anything is preferable. To wander into the market, and you can drift in, being no more conscious than you normally are, having at very best 3D sight, at 12 o'clock at night, perhaps even down to 2D. And you can still stop your car, go into the market, get a loaf of bread, even fill your car up with gas, pay the person, probably get back the correct change, go home, get in bed, and go to sleep. It's quite easy to do that with 2D sight. But the very most you ordinarily just drifting on being you is going to be 3D sight. Preferable under every condition than that would be to go into that market and to have specifically, and it doesn't matter what the hell it is, but specifically, willfully, decide to be something specific. Being you is inspecific. It always is. It is always inspecific. You're just in the habit of doing it, and it does not take any willful thought. It doesn't take any notice. You just park the car, you get out, and nothing wrong. That's the way ordinary people are. It's not a shortcoming of humanity. It's not as some would-be mystical systems believe that, hey, that's the curse of humanity and everybody's fighting to be more conscious. Well, you people are fighting to be more conscious, but it's not a curse on humanity. That's the way they're supposed to be. 2D sight is mostly the order of the day. A few people here and there have 3D sight. There's a few people in the power chain that mechanically have a kind of 4D sight, but normally 2D sight will take you through life, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a curse, but it is for you, and you would be better off before you got out to simply decide willfully, on purpose, I'm going to appear to be something specific. I'm going to appear to be happy man. Or I'm going to appear to be Mrs. Concerned. To go in and perhaps pick up the milk and say, pardon me, miss, is this correct price? Has the milk gone up since yesterday, since last week? Or Mr. Happy Man might just be, hello, how are you? Boy, don't you love milk? What a nice night it is. To willfully, to plan to be something specific. Drifting along being you is inspecific. You cannot be a revolutionary and be you. You can't do it. It's too easy. It requires no effort. It'll get by on 2D sight. It is that thing that Kyroot noted again last week for you, that to a revolutionist, ordinary consciousness tastes like your foot feels when it goes to sleep. That was primarily referring to 2D consciousness. Some of you should have that taste even at 3D level, that it still sucks. It's dull. It is the prime, or one of the prime ingredients to make one stolid. It is unacceptable. Now to matters even more specific, more every day. Still having to do with revolutions, 4D sight, and now let's bring in that wonderful, ever popular subject of talk. I would like to remind you people that many moons ago, I had occasion once, I pointed out to you that from the human level, all ordinary talk, all ordinary conversation, from one human level, could be divided into two kinds. Social conversation and what would seem to be specific, or to set up an alliteration, social conversation and scientific, specific conversation, passing along of information. The difference between social being, hey, did I tell you how sick I've been? And then the specific information, specific conversation, be, oh, 14th Street, well, all you do is you go down 2nd Avenue, 1 street past 13th, and there it is. There are two, you can see them, kinds of conversation going on in life. That seems to be, they're both transferring energy, of course, and both of them are serving necessary purposes. But one is just a passing along of social information, social energy, as opposed to this other possibility that I am arbitrarily defining for you, that the other one seems to be that there is specific information of some kind being relayed. Specific information / energy. So you've got the choice that you're either conveying the specific detailed energy or you're conveying some kind of social, personal message. Now try and remember that. Now let me ask you a question. Question number 1 for the night. Query uno. What is there to be truly said about anything that's already been done? What is there to truly be said? Now, this is to you people, would-be revolutionists, not the world. But to you, what is there truly to be said about anything that's already been done? By way of, if not oblique answers, hints, when it reaches the point that many of you have reached off and on, which is good enough for the time being, but when anybody has reached the point that they know anything personally of an extraordinary nature, and then talk much at all, put much at all in quotation marks. If they know anything at all extraordinary and they talk much at all, comma, they talk too much. Or I guess I could make a corollary of that. If any of you by now wonder, if you ever wonder if you talk too much, you do. I brought up an example last week. I was going to bring up similar ones, but I want to make sure that this has been purified, pureed, and clarified. I mentioned something about kinds of archetypical characters that are taciturn, and I mentioned I've used in the past, I'd refer to a Clint Eastwood and I don't mean those people specifically, as you should know. We're just simply talking about roles being played up on the screen that is a reflection of those kind of people. But I'm asking you, what is it throughout history? And this is not a phenomenon that is simply post-Hollywood. Throughout history, throughout written history, there has been a large segment of life's body, that is, of humanity, that finds some kind of heroic aura around people of very few words. You go and you pay your money, whatever it costs now, to see a movie, and you see a Clint Eastwood, and sometimes past, I guess it would have been a John Wayne. There was a James Dean kind of stuff going on through one period of time, and you paid your big money to see the star come out, and the star just said 2 or 3 things. I guess I'm missing the obvious nowadays is Sylvester Stallone. And if you paid your money and you were expecting to, if you're going to figure it out, well, how many words did I hear from this great actor? What are you paying? $1 per word that the guy said? It's not the same, for instance. It's neither here nor there in any sort of objective way, but it would not be the same to go as you would see a film of, say, Sir Laurence Olivier doing Hamlet. But you'll go and you'll pay your money. Boy, a brand new Clint Eastwood, that kind of figure, an hour and a half good of action, and he maybe says 5 words. But there is something special with men. And of course, up to now, it's been men molecularly who made history and recorded history. But it would seem to be striking in the molecular structure of humanity, something very basic of people who say very little. And the reason I bring this up again is you should find that interesting. If you don't see any more than that, you should find it interesting. People who understand anything and talk much at all are talking too much. I know last week, even Kyroot, strike even, said that 9% of all so-called psychiatric problems were caused by poor posture. Far be it from me to correct Kyroot. I can see the validity of that from one view, but I could give you another one. As far as would-be revolutionists are concerned, 90% of all problems, psychiatric and otherwise, are caused by talk. Hence, I go back to the chorus of this particular refrain and ask you again, what is there that can truly be said about anything that's already happened, anything that's already been done? What's there to be said about it? In ordinary life, of course, there's lots to be said about it. And then some. And then say it again. Say it again some. Write it down. Put it away, read it. Read to somebody else what they said about it. Then read what somebody critiqued the first person's saying about it. Then you think about it. Then you have something to say about it. As far as things that's already happened, what else is there to talk about? If we're going to strike out talking about that which has already happened, what are you going to talk about? Obviously, this is not any sort of worldwide potential tenet. Some of you should be close enough that you can see the kind of mechanical being you babble. You can see it at the ordinary level as being necessary. It is a kind of verbal fidgeting. It produces a kind of transfer of energy that is necessary for the overall health of life. Well, I would like to point this out to you. It is the parts of life's operations that are the furthest from the center core of life's own consciousness that make the most noise. Where does the most noise come from in the, as I've described it in the past, the factory of life? Who talks the most? Just at the ordinary, everyday level. You look around, and unless you're one of them, you see that the people that talk the most are those that know the least. Those that talk the most are those that, just from a horizontal view, seem to have the least consequence, the least significance to life. The louder you hear somebody talking, the more consistently you hear somebody babbling in a room, in an area. And as I said, unless you're one of them, and if you had some occasion to try and, in a mystical way, try and picture who in this room, who in this area is closest to being a poster boy for doltism, I suggest, unless you're one of them, that you'd be drawn over to the guy that's talking real loud and has a whole lot to say about anything. Of course, any of you who want to can take all this personally. That is, you can take it all internally. But it is still true externally. It is true in the overall body of life's part known as humanity. It's the parts of life's body that's the furthest away from its own core of consciousness that make the most noise. For those of you of a potentially perspective nature, I did want to have one thing. Our audio-visual, gimmick for the night, is you should have your own motto, a continuing motto. And it should be, your continuing motto toward yourself, not other people. Toward yourself should be, shut the fuck up. If any of you were that far gone, if any of you were that far along, and some of you are, in a strange way you do understand that this is as simple right now as some of you can hear the wide horizon of what you now understand. That maybe at the ordinary level, 9% of people do have psychiatric problems because of poor posture. But you understand that you got poor posture in general, that you keep yourself bogged down, drifting along being you. And one way to look at it is you do it because you talk too damn much. You talk too much to the person you live with. You talk too much to anybody you come in contact with. You talk too much to your parents. You talk too much to people working in 7-Eleven stores. You talk too much with people you work with. And of course, I hate to be dirty, but you talk too much to yourself. And assuming that all of you have the wherewithal that you can do something about your posture, should be child's play. That should be your motto. Anything beyond the factory, the mind level, getting up to the parts that really make a person potentially humanoid, that up there the motto should be toward oneself is shut the fuck up. Pointing out that you have got to take your choice, either ultimately, with some of you almost immediately. You've got to bring this closer to every day. That many of you are close enough that you should be able to get a very good glimpse, if not a very strong suspicion, a very direct whiff of the truthfulness of this, that what still seems to be, oh, you drifting along, and oh, you with all your shortcomings, and oh, you that seems to be an internal partnership gone awry, all the problems. Some of you should get a glimpse of this, as simplistically as it sounds verbally, that all of that would change drastically. I'm trying to sound fairly intellectual and understated. Those of you who can go otherwise, it would stop. That all these so-called problems and difficulties, shortcomings, self-condemnation, that all that would be gone if you could shut the fuck up. It's got to be a willful and specific act, of course. This does not apply, and there's a few of you that I'll go ahead and mention this to. This does not apply if you are already hardwired up by life to be afraid, which is what it amounts to be verbally submissive. And there are some of you who hardly talk at all. You hardly talked when I met you, but that don't count. You knew that. You got to willfully do it. And just because some of you people hardly talk externally does not mean that you hardly talk internally. Maybe you fooled somebody else somewhere. Maybe you've even fooled you, but you sure as hell hadn't fooled me. I know how it goes. Your motto has got to be willfully, shut the fuck up. This does not bode promisingly. For instance, I should point to some of the pitfalls to ordinary relationships. In times past, it always seemed to go from the distaff side, one of these, that a woman's always pulling on a man's sleeve saying, hey, won't you talk to me more? Won't you turn off the TV? Why are you always so quiet? Why don't we talk about what new house will we buy? Why don't we talk about something interesting like me? How do you like the way I look? It is no longer one-sided. It was never one-sided, but now it's certainly not one-sided. But it can, if we were ordinary, we could see that it would immediately put a potential strain on ordinary relationships. I ask you again to consider, is it not interesting that ordinary people do not like, although there seems to be a kind of attraction to our typical heroes from afar, the Clint Eastwood syndrome on the screen or a character in a piece of literature, but up close, in general, people do not like those who do not talk. What's wrong? What are you up to? Are you mad? Won't you say something? People simply do not care for it. People need, this is not a shortcoming of life, there's nothing wrong with ordinary people. That is why I took the trouble to point out and describe it in a certain way that one part of human conversation serves social needs. That's just a description, but it is energy being passed along that is serving personal, social needs as opposed to specific information being conveyed. People need talk. People need talk, ordinary people. People need talk as much as they need being hugged, being assured, being smiled upon, the belief that somebody cares about them. They need to be talked to. It's a form of medicine. It is a form of patting. It is a form of reassurance. It's a form of almost anything you want to call it. But under ordinary conditions, people need it. I know that on bad days, some of you are still ordinary. But the justice of all this works in such a way that you're not going to get hurt much by this. By me pointing it out or trying to even more specifically tonight. If you reach a certain point, you understand that your motto, until further notice, should be shut the fuck up. And you can then specifically begin to notice if it begins to have, at a horizontal level, in an ordinary sense, it begins to have an adverse effect upon a relationship between your sexual partner, your family. Then, in relationship to this horrendous, threatening problem, you take the death-defying action of doing what? You specifically act like something else. Well, that's a big, heavy load. You simply, specifically act like something other than you. In this case, the you has now become a you that's shutting the fuck up. So then you act like somebody who's not shutting the fuck up. But you do it specifically. Something a little more specifically. Or a couple of things. You should never talk about anybody in the past tense. That is, you should never talk about anybody with any frame of reference to them doing something, having something done to them, being alive in the past. The past in this sense, being that variation of my cross, that let's consider there's a little long line of ordinary time, and this is it, going from the past to the future, and right now, some little line like that is always the right now. The past is anywhere over on that side. You should never talk about anybody, your mother, your father, your first wife, your third husband, God, yourself. Is don't ever, if you're going to talk about people, never, just make it another one of your mottos, I will never talk about anybody in the past tense. That is, you can't talk about anything that they did or that was did to them if it's in the past tense. If it's not right now or in the apparent future, let's face it, it's in the past. Don't do it. Do not do it. There's nothing to be said. It's been done. It is a specific danger. One danger I will go ahead and put into words for you. One of the dangers of talking about people is that what you say about them simply reinforces your own present wired up beliefs. It keeps your own systems charged up, ignited, and operating in the way in which they have been, and it reinforces it. Now, if we want to appear to be, for a moment, even a little ordinary, if not religious, this is what ordinary people, this is what ordinary religions refer to as gossip. And they're always condemning it. And they don't know why. Well, they know why. They pull out the good book. They pick out their holy book, and somewhere in every goddamn holy book there is, it says, don't gossip about your neighbor. Again, you should find this kind of thing interesting. That's worldwide. It's history-wide. Why? If there were gods somewhere, little creatures that are similar to us but a lot bigger and stronger, with a higher line of credit on their Visa card, did they sit around somewhere before they made man and all of this, and they thought, what kind of things should we let man stumble on and invent and make up and start doing that are real yucky and that we'll tell them not to do? And somebody said, how about gossip? And another guy said, what the hell is gossip? And the person says, oh, I don't know, it just came to mind. And they decide, all right, gossip will be this. If you say something bad, another guy says, what's bad? You know, it goes on and on. They finally say, all right, if you say something that seems to be bad, something negative about somebody else, that's gossip, and we'll condemn it. But let's make man in such a way that everybody's going to want to gossip. And they all go, hee, hee, hee. You should find it interesting. Forget my hee, hee, hee. It's ask yourself, what in the hell was life up to? But it is worldwide a condemnation of, quote, gossip. I'm telling you, there is, as always, a validity to it. It's not moral, it's not religious, and it's got nothing to do with gods. It's got damn little to do with ordinary people, other than the fact to keep them irritated, to give them that necessary spark of motivational guilt. But with you people, I'm just telling you an absolute fucking fact. You've gone this far, and you think a lot of what I said has finally made sense. At surprising times it jumps up and bites you on the ass when you're not expecting it. And I'm telling you, you should not talk about people in the past tense. I've tried to tell you a little more complex in the past. I just said don't talk about people. But now I'm telling you more simplistically, is don't talk about people in the past tense. Whatever that leaves possible, go ahead and do it. Knock yourself out. But you should not be talking about people in the past tense. Now, may I also point out to you that that includes you. Do not talk about yourself in the past tense. I'm telling you that all of this, we've got to go into the fourth dimension. Remember, everything has been defined and talked about on this level in 3 dimensions as a piece of something else. It's not just imagination. It's not the flying pig. It's at the very least a portion of something larger. The portion of something larger that I'm referring to is, if you saw it more, if you saw it in truth in a kind of 4D manner, you wouldn't talk about people. You simply wouldn't do it and forget why. Other than I told you it's not religious, it's not moralistic. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it any more than we'll assume that all of you are now reasonable enough that you will not go home and take a pencil, a number 2 eagle, and to stick it in your eye. No, especially more than 5 or 6 times a night. Let's assume you wouldn't do that. Really? Now I'm telling you, you wouldn't talk about people. You wouldn't talk about you in the past tense. Your motto would be, toward yourself, is shut the fuck up. You are supporting a form of tyranny every time you talk about people. You are reinforcing it as though the kind of patterns that are going on take it up to a high mechanical, a high horizontal level. Your own neurological part of your nervous system, the so-called brain, you are simply reinforcing it. It's like saying the same thing over and over. It's like any habit in the 3D world. You continue to do it, it becomes more and more of a habit. It becomes easier and easier, and it is simply then you drifting along being you. You should not be talking about anybody. There are no villains, there are no heroes, there is nothing to say. I'm not going to ask you again, what is there to truly say about that which has been done? Everybody else thinks there is. I don't know why the hell I babble sometimes. Everybody else doesn't think there is. Everybody else has to is. But then if you stop and I try to present some sort of at least rhetorical question to it, then you think, well, all right, I can imagine how this happens. I can imagine the uses of this out in the ordinary world. People must talk about one another. And they must. You're right. It transfers energy. People must talk about other people. But I'm saying you must not talk about other people. It's already been done. The only thing you're going to talk about people is in the past tense. The only events you're going to talk about is the past tense. And don't tell me that sometimes you try to talk about the future because all you're talking about then is flying pigs. You're taking your own past and you're trying to put wings on it, and then you can say, your own partnership can say, all right, I was talking to so-and-so, I'll admit this, I was talking. Now you might have called it Bible and you might have called it loose tongue, but now I was talking about something in the future. I wasn't gossiping about somebody. I was talking about something that me and another person may do in the future. But you're talking about flying pigs. You're talking about the past, and you attempted to put wings on it. You're still talking about the past. You're talking, everything's in the past tense. You're talking about dead heroes. You're talking about dead saints. You're reinforcing your own wired up belief systems. You're keeping all the energy that could ignite you in some other area. You're keeping it right down at line level, and you're drifting along being you. And now a word from our sponsor. One of the potential verbal 3D traps is confronting us again. I'll point it out in passing that this can sound so simplistic that there are parts of everyone's own nervous system that talks to you internally. That is what seems to be your own mind that can say, well, sometimes this almost sounds interesting. You can put it in such a way that you even make me uncontrollably go, ha ha, like that has some effect, but it can't not be that simple, or even if there is some validity to it, I can't go do it. I cannot go home and shut up. It drives my mate crazy. I can't go around shutting the fuck up. I just can't do it. I just smell some validity, some potential to it, but I can't do it. As always, there is some validity in that. that we're dealing with a 3D world. We're dealing with the fact that all of you are still playing in traffic. We're dealing with the fact that that kind of mechanical talk is not wrong. You're not set up to be inside of a belief system like everybody else is with their religion, that there are rules and standards to say, for instance, to use my example, that we have a religion here, and the religion says, by God, everybody talks too much. And if you're going to worship our God and go to our paradise, then at the very least, starting immediately, now that you're going to join our church and give us your firstborn, but after that, the main thing you got to agree immediately is you got to talk 90% less than you ever have up until now. All right, that sounds reasonable, even if it sounds unreasonable. If it can be explained, if you're told this is the way it has to be, then of course nobody can do it. Everybody fails, including the man preaching it. That is safe enough. It is not going to affect any sort of balance of life because it came from the more noisy, remote areas of life's body. For somebody to understand somewhere within themselves that my motto should be, by and large, and it would probably be more help to me than correcting my posture, would be if I could shut the fuck up. The justice being that very few people can do that. Even though you may sit here now and some of you may hear this tape, see this tape at some other time, some other place, and it still, you may think, strikes you as being potentially very potent. Like being a very exciting foodstuff, like a ballistic Newton. Even though you may believe that, justice is such that there's no great danger that you're going out and do it to the degree to wreck your marriage, to lose your job, to make your family turn on you, and to have ordinarily domesticated animals begin to chew on your ankles. That's not the way it goes. The justice is inherent in all of this. And many of you feel like that perhaps you've tried it. Some of you may even now believe that you've tried it in the past and you went too far. Some of you may tried it and believe that it harmed some relationship. People believe all kinds of crap. If you now understand anything at all extraordinary, and you talk much at all, you talk too much. What is there to be truly said about anything that's already happened? I can go back to those of you that believe you may be missing something here and give you as a task is to apply yourself wholeheartedly for the next week to try and look and listen at what you say and tell me what you talk about. Do you talk about the past? Do you talk about the present? Do you talk about the future, about your plans? Do you talk about yourself a lot? Or do you mostly talk about other people? And it doesn't matter. I can make it sound like it matters. Ordinary, fairly ordinary would-be mystical systems, low-level forms of this kind of activity can say, all right, everybody observe that you talk way too much about yourself, and the gods don't like that. That's a show of egoism, and it'll keep you from going to our God's paradise. And everybody observes, and everybody comes back and says, you're right. I talk a lot about myself. And the head guru picker says, who do you think you are? You think you're right. Forms of this kind of activity can say, all right, everybody observe that you talk way too much about yourself, and the gods don't like that. That's a show of egoism, and it'll keep you from going to our God's paradise. And everybody observes, and everybody comes back and says, you're right. I talk a lot about myself. And the head guru picker says, who do you think you are? You think you're right. It doesn't matter whether you're apparently talking too much about yourself, too much about somebody else, too much about the future, too much about the past. If you understand anything now, extraordinary, chances are you're talking way too much. And an absolute fail-safe present standard is, as I've already mentioned, if you wonder at all, do I talk too much? You do. Count on it. Bet the farm on it. Take my word for it. If at any time you leave a situation and you wonder, did I talk too much? Ha, ha, ha. Ho, ho. Of course, if you get real good, some of you here and there may have left a situation and thought to yourself, as you and yourself like to think to itself, boy, I sure am tired from just sitting there for the last 3 hours. Can a person get tired from talk? Oh, no. And then just for a splitting headache, a splitting moment, you might have thought, do you know, I believe I just completely, as we say down south, wore myself out from talking. And then yourself went, apasha. You can't get tired from talking. Well, some of you may find out you can die from talking. The human voice can get you killed. Just ask the man hiding in the bedroom closet in his shorts when he coughed at the wrong time after the husband got home. The astute, the would-be real revolutionaries, learn to shut the fuck up. I, in fact, have a story for you. Let me beat Kyroot to the punch. It's a Kyroot type of story. There was a fella, could have been a fellowette, but there was a guy that seemed to have the reputation of being maybe some kind of teacher. He had some things he had written that had been handed about, and he had a little reputation. And one time he wanders into this city in which he had never been before. And very shortly, a crowd of people came up and identified him, and he said, yeah. And then they identified themselves as being a group of people, at least a part of a group of people, that had been reading his works and meeting together, and they never imagined that they'd ever meet him personally. Just never imagined it, so they'd been taking his works, which they considered to be very important, and they've been meeting on a regular basis and discussing them. And gee, here you are unexpectedly in person. If we gather everybody together, would you consider coming and saying something to us? And he said, okay. So he went and got everybody else, and he came to them. He said, all right, I'll consider telling you something. But first, I got 2 questions. First question is, you people are telling me that collectively, after reading what I have written and what you heard I've said, and etc., you people believe that my ideas, that my maps, are the epitome of contemporary understanding and knowledge. And they said, yes. And he said, all right, wait a minute. Before I consider telling you something, I got one more question. And you're telling me that on a regular basis, you people get together and you debate and you discuss my ideas. And they said, yes, yes, yes. Seriously and at great, great length. And he said, okay, I do have something to tell you. And he said, there's nothing to fucking discuss. That was it. So I'm glad I told you that, because if I'd let Kyroot write it down and some of you people read it, you wouldn't have done it right. I'd had to put a note, which I don't like to do, or had Kyroot put a note saying the last line, shout at the top of your voice. I like the story. And it's a story of everybody. It's a story of everyday life. And if you can see it good, you can turn it internally into your land. In your land, people have shown up, people that you never thought you'd meet, ideas you thought you'd never have, perceptions you didn't think were possible. The loyal opposition, the internal partnership, they believe, well, hey, I'm glad I'm beginning to see this, because all my life, I wasn't as big a dolt as that guy kept insinuating. All my life, I've been thinking important thoughts, considering other possibilities, debating some of the world's great ideas, discussing them amongst myself. There's nothing to fucking discuss. unless you're just a group of ordinary people that thought they would never meet a source. Ordinary people that when asked, you mean you people debate and you discuss this? Not only did they answer yes, they said yes, yes, twice. And then even point out seriously and at great, great length. To them, this was an attribute, an added incentive for the man to say something, which of course he did. Even if you can't be a verb, preferable being a noun would be to be an adjective. I'm going to stop shortly and have an epilogue on the tape for you people out of town and out of sync. You people out of town and out of time. But I think I'll throw a little bit of this on the tape, the regular tape. Back to the my division of two types of human conversation, the social and the specific, the informative. You know, the former, vis-a-vis you people and me, both here and out of town, the former, I assume you must see. It's not bragging on me, but I have no additional need for the former, from you, from anybody. And yet you people still do. Nothing wrong with that. But some of you people, especially out of time, that is out of town, there's some of you people that just get barely exposed to me personally, either through the tape or that you come down here or I come wherever you are and I meet you once. There is this continuing phenomenon that if I could be disappointed, I'd be disappointed. Aww. If I could be pissed, I'd be pissed. It's this kind of thing. I try and give everybody, let's say, to put words on it, which is just useless talk, but we got, hell, half a tape left. Let's say that everybody who shows up for any length of time to see these tapes, people haven't even seen me in person. They come with the groups in these other cities and they listen to the tapes, they watch the tapes. Let's call it that I give them the positive benefit of the doubt. That yes, somewhere in you is already wired up a kind of need, a potential to hear some of this, and so that you're not just some rummy that stumbled in off the street, some bag lady looking for a warm spot to squat. That there is potentially something in you. Then, with just slight exposure, as this little phenomenon that continues, is like we meet for a little bit somewhere, or else you think you picked this up from the tapes, that it's as though you mistake my apparent niceness for a kind of naivete, that you mistake my apparent curiosity and interest in you, that I'll take you aside if I meet you and I ask you who you are, what you're up to, where you came from. My apparent interest. That a whole lot of you continue this, you mistake that for some kind of lack of understanding, or that I'm questioning you so I can learn something. All this is apparent. At least any of you think that, well, you can think anything you want to. But my apparent niceness, my apparent interest in you, my apparent curiosity, if it lasts 2 or 3 minutes that we meet, to mistake that for something else is just, it's not to hurt me, but you're running a dangerous risk of hurting yourself if you actually belong in this kind of activity. I'd like to remind you that Kyroot, or one of his cousins, also pointed out something once I quoted to you as far as humans and being interested apparently in humans, that if you've seen one, you've seen them all. I got an update on that, and that is that everybody's a dead giveaway. Everybody's a dead giveaway. Yet many of you that I gave some benefit of a positive doubt, some of you that even gave yourself a benefit of a positive doubt, now feel as though you're some part of this, and you revert back to just drifting and being you, being at times flippant, being dangerously sarcastic, and you think it is some display to me of your hipness, that perhaps I'm naive enough that I'd never thought about that, or that I could not be sarcastic. Any of you who still think that, I guess it requires that you do have a pretty lengthy arm's distance from me. But any of you who think that I can't out-sarcastic you, any of you who think that I could not out-smart-mouth you, that shows that the camera does lie. That my very deep down intrinsic nature of being just a first-class, real hostile and mad, smart-aleck bastard, in some way, it's just not coming through correctly. But of me meeting some of you people for the first time, the second time, and apparently just very nice, I don't talk about me, and I don't seem to try to impress you, and I don't give you a sales pitch. I just apparently ask you, well, so you're so-and-so that's been meeting up in New York or with the LA group, or what are you up to? What's new? What do you do? What are your hobbies? As though I really care. As though I'm curious. I've never heard it all before. Or that I seem to be so nice that I must be reading all this. I must be programmed to come out here every time we tape it, because otherwise I seem to be too dull. I'm not enough of an ogre. It's too nice, the whole thing. That there's some kind of a raging, sarcastic, smart-aleck, hip, sophisticated beast still in you that would eat me alive. I could give everybody on this planet sarcastic lessons. Trust me. If you think you're a hip, I could put you in my back pocket. If there was any point to it all. I just wanted to bring this out to remind you people that if you truly believe that you're destined to stay involved with this as long as I'm alive or otherwise, you should be cautious about it. Everybody is born a yokel, and most people stay a fucking yokel. Now, I don't care whether you were born in New York, whether you were born in Oklahoma City and then moved to New York and have lived there a long time, and that you can find your way around in the subway system. Everybody is born a yokel, and very few people ever get off the farm. All they physically get out of Birmingham and Cucamonga and Warwick and Oklahoma City. But most people are born, well, everybody's born a yokel, but most people die a yokel. That's part of the intrigue in life's own body, necessarily so. It's part of the intrigue of people to move uptown. They don't understand in a real sense what this is not just an attempt to move to the city, but this would really be the attempt to get uptown. But it's not going to show. If it was a show, anybody could do it. If it was a show, then anybody who understood anything, anybody who had 4D sight would still be seeing dollar signs, they'd be seeing whatever possessions seemed to be. They'd still have some interest in what people thought about them. They'd have some interest in talking about themselves. They would still have a whole closet full, probably two, closetfuls of being themselves. Closetfuls of things that can only be seen as having any value with 3D sight. With any further sight, it's just stuff. It may be attractive stuff, it may be in passing enjoyable stuff, but it's simply stuff. It's not to talk about. You people who believe that you might be close to where you belong, any of you who may suspect that you're smelling aromas of a homeland that you didn't know you had, I'm just telling you that you should be cautious. Because you can outsmart yourself. You can out-flippant yourself. You can out-sarcastic yourself. And it's nothing to me. You're not impressing me. I enjoy hearing from some of you. Some of you, it is almost disappointingly surprising the way you will jump in. Well, let me refer to Kyroot again. It's surprising the numbers of ways that people can find to cheat themselves. The damage that people can find to do themselves. People that were at least on the surface initially unordinary enough to get attracted to this, to come see a few weeks, a few months worth of tapes. But then the numerous ways that people can stab themselves, that people can walk across a room. If it's dark, get out a flashlight, turn the light so they can walk over to the edge of the steps and stub their toe. It's just amazing, isn't it? Figure of speech, I don't mean it's amazing. In conclusion, at least let me tell you this. Watch it. Ready? First, this is for the people out of town, as I have a task. Most of you, I assume, been out of town, know about the task here that I had people involved with of working on a history of man and the great books, etc. And since it's almost impossible to get everybody here and you people out of town involved with the same project, I know many of you out of town have expressed your desire to be so involved, but it's very difficult. So you people out of town, here is a task for you specifically. I'm eventually going to get it down here. We're just doing it sort of step by step, but I want you people out of town, everybody in the other cities getting these tapes right now who are seriously involved with this by the kind of definition and standards I've already given you out of town. Here is the task. As soon as possible, within a few days after you hear this tape, I want you to send to me an area, a subject that you select. And if you don't hear from me, that means it's fine. I just don't want to get, if there's any chance of two people picking the same thing. I want you to pick an area / subject, or an area of a subject, in which you have 38 weeks to become an expert. Now, I leave it to you. It can be something that you're already involved with, or it can be something new. But I want you to pick out something that you could become an expert on this basis, that you could get up to us, which one way or the other I want everybody to ultimately either do in person, of us coming out there, you coming here, or us videotaping it, that you could do a strong 2 or 3 hours for 4 or 5 nights, as though you were a horizontal professor, and that your area, well, let's say, was, you can pick out Baroque music, the German expressionist painters, the 100 greatest books in the Western world, 20th century architecture, or narrow it down. If some of you, if you just wanted to do the music and importance, music / legacy of J.S. Bach instead of Baroque music. Pick out some area that would lend itself to you becoming, quote, an expert within the next 38 weeks, and that you could have written out, you can use notes, but written out a good, solid 2 or 3 hours per night, and let's say a solid 4 nights. So let's say we're talking about a minimum of a 10-hour series of lectures, that anyone who is interested, and you can have all the notes you want to, I just don't want you to stand there, of course, and read them, but to work it out that you could give, let us say, a minimum of a 10-hour discourse, and to anyone interested that would sit there and listen, that in those 10 hours you could tell them enough from all sorts of ordinary horizontal views and angles, enough about, for instance, Baroque music, or Bach, or Mozart, 20th century architect, World War I, the sack of Rome, of something that would lend itself to this kind of time frame I'm talking about, to fill up a good 10 hours, but you could cover in 10 hours enough that within those 10 hours, in your 38 weeks of work on it, that in a real sense, you are now a walking expert on that one thing. That you can not only give your discourse, But of course, there would have been many, many times the 10 hours of your discourse involved in you getting that good to put it together, that where after the 10 hours, or interspersed with it, the people, that is us, not being smart aleck, but the people, if we so wanted to structure it, the people would say, well, could I ask you this? Not just specifics and dates and about, well, do you know who J.S. Bach's great-great-grandmother was? Not that, but somebody asked a question that you never thought about that way, you would have now been well-read enough, you would have studied enough, that almost anything anybody could ask that was really just three-dimensionally germane to your area and your subject, you could almost give some meaningful response to it. Even if you said, well, no, I have not thought about it that way, but what you're asking, I would suggest, and you could say something about it. That's what I mean by an expert. Even a 38-week expert in quotation marks. But that for a 10-hour period, anybody that we said, all right, so-and-so from California, from New York, from Florida, from Tarzana, is going to give us their discourse on whatever the subject was. Higher math, new physics. And it doesn't have to be just, don't just take my examples. It could just be like a college level introduction to chemistry. Let us say that you skip through chemistry. In some way you avoid it in college. And you sit around and you think that I don't really know what a molecule, I don't even know what an element is. I couldn't explain it. That I'd like to know. That's dumb. To walk around here and pass for being intelligent, and I could not give you a definition of a damn element. I know there's a whole bunch of them, and I know they make up everything. What's the difference in an element and a molecule? What's the difference in a molecule and an atom? So let us say just a college-level entry course in chemistry. That's fine. Don't apologize for it. If that strikes you that, boy, I've always wanted to do that, then you pick out chemistry. Not new chemistry, not atomic chemistry, not molecular chemistry. Chemistry. Like basic chemistry. Chemistry 101. But that you could give us 10 hours worth that would hold anybody's attention that was vaguely interested in chemistry would find it interesting. And they'd want to sit there and take notes and learn something. It would be enjoyable. That is your task, and within 38 weeks, I am expecting. You people by now know what I mean by expect. At the end of 38 weeks, you could then put together your 10-hour discourse, your 10-hour introduction, your 10-hour reflection of you being a 38-week wonder expert on that subject, in that area. That's the task. Just another couple of comments to you people out of town. The communiques I've sent to you people out of town right now in the last few weeks and the revision of what I expect of you, I am pleased to see that I've already got reports that it has put a kind of jolt into some of you, and if nothing else, it has caused you people to change the place you meet up there. We have had some jolts put in down here. They've been on the surface fairly physical, but I'm glad to see that something new is taking place in the other cities. And more individually, you people out of town, these stories that I get of some of you people out of town that think that you're seriously interested in this and you can't be at all the meetings, or I get these reports that some of you have not been attending meetings for the last X number of weeks or months because of some personal conflict, but you've been getting copies of the tape and watching them. Let me tell you, unless it is something specific that you write me about, and it had better be physically, humanly, literally, almost impossible to avoid, I'm going to expect that you people out of town, if you consider yourself seriously involved with this, that you arrange to get to those meetings, or you arrange to be gone. You arrange to be adooed. I expect an absolute individual, your responsibility to the expenses in your city. But I expect you people that I get these notes about of having months sometimes of people not being at meetings. I want an explanation of that. I want it stopped unless I find an explanation satisfying. And if you cannot arrange your life to get to these meetings, wherever it is in your city, or watching these tapings with the rest of the group, if you can't arrange it, you got to tell me why, and I've got to accept it. And if it's real, if it is humanly unavoidable, then I'll accept it. But if it's not, I won't accept it. And you're going to have to be at those meetings. You're going to have to be a constant participant along with everybody else at those meetings, or get out. And go back to being you. Is that all? Yes.